setting up a board game group at your place of worship. On this episode of Board Game Faith, the bi-weekly podcast exploring the intersection of religion, spirituality, and board games. We're so happy to have you along for the ride today. My name is Daniel Hilty.
And my name is Kevin Taylor.
And it is a joy to get to spend a few moments of your day with you. Thank you for pushing the button to listen to this podcast. We are grateful for you. Kevin, I'm grateful for you. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Rainy day yesterday. We were sliding everywhere, and then today is a really pretty 55-degree weather. I'm looking at blue skies.
Nice.
55 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 400 Kelvin.
400 Kelvin. Yes, for our Venusian listeners. That's right. We the first interplanetary board game.
We try to be inclusive.
Yeah,
towards temperature scales.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you mentioned the Kelvin scale. That was
yes.
That was good.
I always wish my name was actually Kelvin, and I could claim it was my scale.
You know, the Kevin scale or the Kelvin scale would both be really cool things.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you said sliding around yesterday, was there like ice?
No, I don't know why I shouldn't have said sliding. I should have said splashing around.
Yeah, I understand.
I guess the feeling of driving and like you're scooting around. I don't know why I said that.
Yeah. You don't get much ice there in North Carolina, your corner of North Carolina, do you? Or
it's unusual, but you know, like many southern cities, we don't have the equipment to deal with it, so it really shuts things down. Right. Boston can brag all they want, but they have a fleet of trucks, so we don't have it. Yeah. How about, and you all, is there a fleet of trucks out there in Missouri?
No, not. I mean, in some parts of Missouri there are, but not. I mean, there are some here in our corner of Missouri, but not a lot. We did have a fair amount of snow a couple weeks ago, but it's
how
mostly
much is
melted
a fair amount?
now. Oh, it was like a couple inches. I mean, that's a fair amount for our corner of the state. But I know we have a lot of listeners in more northern climates. A lot of listeners in Canada, Saskatchewan and Alberta and
hello Canada,
Wisconsin. Yeah, and I know there's been a fair amount of snow and the further north you go from here. So blessings to all of you who are having to dig out.
Have you ever read David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest?
I've heard of it, but no, I haven't read it.
I started it years ago and I didn't get far, and now I've restarted it, and it's pretty funny, and there's a lot of, I think, Canadian humor in it. like a lot of the plot line involves, I don't know, separatists in Quebec and I don't know. It's a strange book, but it's kind of funny. Yeah. It's
a huge book too, isn't it? From what I recall,
it is massive, and it's very strange.
Okay.
But he's a brilliant writer.
Okay.
Cool. He said something about like a little 2-year-old child was like standing there like a fire hydrant, and I thought, that is what little kids look like. Like he makes these metaphors and comparisons, and you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, because they kind of just stand there, right?
That 2-year-old child is like a fire hydrant,
often in bright colors. They just sort of standing there, and it's like, and they're kind of squat
with a little arm sticking out on the side. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Especially if they're wearing like a little stocking cap, then they're just like, yeah. That's cool.
And I've had to look up several words. So he's a smart dude.
Cool.
Was a smart dude. Unfortunately, he's now deceased.
Okay. Infinite Jest.
Yeah. Well, today, Daniel, we are going to talk about setting up a board game group in a place of worship.
Right.
Which is something you have experience with, because you have done this how many times successfully?
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. We've done it a a couple times at a couple different churches I've been at, and and it's been a really good experience at both places. We're certainly, or I'm certainly no expert at it, and have and it's been a learning process both places, and maybe if some things hopefully we got right. I'm sure a lot of things we could have done better, maybe got wrong, but it's been a lot of fun and a good process at both places. And so that was something we thought might be good to talk about in one of these episodes. It's actually a question I know I've gotten a fair amount of times from folks over the last year or so, Kevin, that you and I have been doing this podcast. It's like, well, we'd really like to get a game group started at our place of worship, like a church or a temple or a synagogue or a center or mosque. And, what are ways of doing that? So that we just thought it'd be good to maybe talk about that. Yeah. And
these ideas would probably apply outside a house of worship, correct? You could take some of these ideas to a workplace or something like that.
For sure. For sure. Fair? Yeah, I think that is fair. Maybe a couple things may need to be tweaked, but that's always true. Yeah. And just to let our listeners know, we have a document. Kevin and I have done a document that kind of summarizes all of the points that we're talking about in today's episode. And folks can probably find that in the show notes of this episode, I would imagine. Kevin, a link to it?
Well, there's a link if you subscribe to our wonderful newsletter. Yes. We will get you a copy. Is that right?
That sounds good. That sounds good. And you can subscribe to our newsletter by going to just finding our link tree in any of our social media, Facebook or Instagram, and click on the link tree, and that gives you an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter. You can find that in the link tree, or you can just email us at info@boardgamefaith.com and say, hey, I want to go on the newsletter, and we'll happy to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it comes out every other week, and we just chit-chat a bit, so.
Yeah. So we're basically just going to kind of talk it through the document, and kind of going from there. So some steps on setting up a board game group at your place of worship.
So where's the place to start, Daniel? What's the first question to ask?
Well, the first thing we talk about in the document is just the importance of kind of figuring out your why. And we've talked a little about this before on the podcast, but when you try to start a board game group at a place of worship or wherever, but maybe especially at a place of worship, people, you can probably expect to have some questions about why are you doing this? And it may seem odd, especially maybe if people find it to be a new idea to have it at a place of worship. And so coming to a sense of why you're doing this will help so that you can answer the questions when they come up, and they probably will come up, and that's okay. Right?
Do you find they often do come up? Because in my one experience with this, it wasn't a deal. Like no one didn't bother people.
Oh, good. They don't come up a lot, but I've had them come up a few times. Yeah, like I'm a pastor. I know you are too, Kevin. Some of the church members saying, "Pastor, why are you doing this? Why are we having a board game group? Instead of why aren't you spending?"
Where do you think they're coming from with that question?
Yeah. I think there is a perception, an idea that has its roots in some thought in religious circles, Christian circles that go back quite a while, to this idea that play is not as important as work, that play is not as valuable as work, and that especially to be religious or spiritual means necessitates a kind of seriousness for most of life. And certainly I think, I can understand where folks come from on that. But I think as we've talked about on this podcast before in other episodes, that has not ever been a universal concept of what it means to be a spiritual person, a religious person. And in particular, the idea that in the Christian tradition, a Christian needs to be, working all the time, diligent all the time, somber, serious all the time, in some ways really did not gain traction as an idea until, the last few centuries. And was not a universal concept in Christianity from the beginning. And so I think it's kind of part of our inherited spiritual culture for many people. And so people don't, when they raise questions like that, they don't mean it maliciously, but it's just part of what we've been raised in.
I guess when you think about the use of space at a church in North America, there's playground for the kids and there's toys for the children. There's a fellowship hall or some sort of area where you can do meals because people eat and connect in that way. And then the rest of it is dedicated to either worship or study.
Right.
Is that fair? So you might have Sunday school classrooms and you might have a worship space. And I guess with youth group, there's an idea of playing games or maybe playing basketball or something. But yes, probably the idea that adults don't play outside of eating and talking.
Right. That somehow when you become an adult, you graduate from play.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas, as we've talked about in previous episodes, play is certainly an important component of spirituality in the human experience. And the religious narrative at any age, even though maybe we don't necessarily give that a lot of thought today. A lot of that really, I think, came from this idea of the Protestant work ethic, some Reformation or Counter-Reformation thought from a few centuries ago. But anyway, yeah. So having a sense of your why is this important, will be helpful, I think.
What are some sample whys?
Yeah. I mean, one is community, right? We've talked about this some before. I can honestly say that I don't know of any other ministry that I've been involved in my churches that bring together a wider diversity of people than board games. I know I've said this before, but it consistently every week brings together college students and retirees who get to know each other and ask about each other's lives. Hey, how are your finals going? Hey, how was your surgery? How are your grandkids? And I've never seen any other ministry ever that brings together those two age groups consistently, where they get to know each other and care about each other. But it's not just those age groups; it's everybody in between. And in the last, as the board games groups have developed, it's also brought in children as well with their parents, and they're never just children on their own. Children with their parents, and I've talked about this before, but it brings together single people, married people, people on both ends of the political perspective. Here in the United States, that means Republicans and Democrats. But you can just substitute whatever political parties are prevalent in your part of the world. It has brought together people of different racial, ethnic backgrounds. I've talked before, it brings together, straight and gay people and men and women. And I've never done any ministry, been involved in any ministry that brings together consistently a greater diversity of people than this. The closest thing is the communion line. In the Christian tradition, we have, communion, Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, and worship. And that's maybe the only other time that I see such a diversity of people coming together. So community is always a big one for me, but there are other reasons as well. But I'd say that's probably one of the first ones that comes to mind.
And by answering that question, what's your goal? Is it to be intergenerational? Is it to focus on youth or a certain group? Then that will determine when you have it and what types of games are being played. So the one thing I saw when our church did it before COVID, and it's not really come back since then, was unfortunately I would sometimes bring more challenging games, and then it created a bit of, there were people that wanted lighter games, and then felt like they weren't smart enough to play the harder games. So I kind of had to phrase it as, no, this is just a game that requires more patience or more, different strokes for different folks. And not everybody has to play the same games. But I was kind of a little sensitive to not creating a caste system where some people felt like, the real gamers versus the more light gamers.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. That's a really excellent
There was
point.
one table of older folks that were playing Rummikub, but they had their house rules and they just played it the same way, and no one ever really won. It was really just kind of like,
It was just an
I don't know,
experience.
it's like a perpetual bingo game, and I
that's
played
cool.
a little bit with them, but I was caught between that and wanting sort of the selfish games that I want to play.
Right.
And so that's always a trick of, I think, if you're really into games, of not being selfish.
I think that's an excellent
So
point.
what game you pick
Yeah.
or bring.
And really touches on some points I think we're going to be getting into later on in the document as well. But yeah, that's exactly right. That you have to, when you're picking your games and thinking about who's going to be teaching them and sharing them, it's important to keep in mind who will be there, who will actually be there.
Right.
It's not like a board game convention where it's all board game hobbyists and enthusiasts, and which I think, like you, Kevin, that's kind of what I was hoping for when I first started. The first group, I wanted to get together people to play like Caverna with me or something like that. But,
Right.
and we did play Caverna, sidebar, but we spread it took like I think 2 months of weekly meetings, of weekly board game groups. And we would take a picture of the board at the end of every week.
Wow.
And then have to set it up again. And it's way too long. I never did anything like that again.
But you tried,
So,
and that's good.
yeah.
You showed
Yeah.
people a different type of game
Thanks.
than they may have been used to. Yeah,
And then
there's a
after-
sweet spot of picking the games, and yes, knowing your audience. So
Right.
if you bring a very D&D type thing, that may turn off some folks who aren't interested in those themes. So picking the right theme that's going to be interesting, it's going to appeal, and it would be fine to just have a board game thing for a youth group. You just need to be clear about that. Maybe
Yeah.
if there are youth at your church and they meet at a certain time, you might have a board game option afterwards. They can stay and play.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you would play games that probably social games, because teenagers they're awkward and they like to socialize, but they don't know how always, because they're not fully formed adults yet. But you and I are, and we know everything. So
I'm hoping one of these days to grow up. Actually, I'm
Yes.
not sure I do hope that, but one of these. It hasn't
I was
happened.
trying to be sarcastic.
I'll
But
just say that. But yeah.
But if it's going to be intergenerational, then you want to find things that are
Right.
going to have a wider appeal. Unless it gets so big that you can have people sort of picking out tape. And that kind of happened with us. That the times there were 10 or 15 people, and so you really just had multiple options of what to play. And when people arrived, and sometimes that would determine people would arrive late and the game had already started.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So having like 2 or 3 tables really helps to. Yeah, you're right, because you're exactly
and
right.
games that they're kind of quick and easy to reset, like Bananagrams was very popular.
Yeah.
Because
that's a great example.
quickly, and even if you're wanting to play, it's only going to be a few minutes till that game ends often.
Yeah.
Then you get in on it.
Yeah.
So yes,
Well,
figuring out your why, knowing your audience. What would you say is the second thing to consider?
The other thing is just technical, and that's just getting approval. If and I just put it on there because I think it's, as a pastor, I probably both think of that. But it's just good to run it past, however your place of worship is governed and structured. It's just good to run it past whoever, just to get approval for it, and that will relate to the why. That's especially why it's good to have your why ready for that. But then after that, you really get into the details. The details. The first item of the detail that I have on the sheet that we have on the sheet is time and frequency, and that's kind of been a process, some thinking on that has kind of evolved over the life of the board game groups here. We have settled on a 2-hour group every week, midweek for about 2 hours. We used to do an hour, or even an hour and a half, but found that was just too short. But for 2 hours, we do 6 to 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights. And I don't know. I mean, any thoughts on that, Kevin?
No, it's a key thing to figure out. I think when we experimented, it was monthly, like the first Sunday of the month.
Yeah.
And there's a youth group at 5, and so we were doing it at, say, 3 o'clock on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So the idea is that people, if kids were coming to youth, they could just come a little earlier, and we had some success with that. And for folks, they would leave church and could get lunch and maybe get a little nap or whatever, and then come back and play. So yeah, it's trying to get that. And a weekly is great because everyone can depend on it. Monthly can be a little tricky because then you have to kind of remember, and it's a harder habit. But yeah, somehow of setting that up. And of course, you got to figure out logistics, who's going to have a key and unlock things.
Right.
So,
but monthly can make it kind of more special too, which I can maybe I could see why that's really important, or it might be an important way of approaching it too. I forgot until just now, but at the previous church, we actually had a kind of a hybrid approach. We had a weekly group that would meet, but then we'd have a monthly, what we'd call all play, which was especially everyone was invited to come. And I mean, everyone was always invited to come, but it was
kind of known that the people that came the weekly were a little more focused. Yeah.
And then we'd really hype up the once a month thing in the larger church, kind of. But yeah. And then you said logistics, having keys is good. That brings into questions of setting, which we talk about on the document as well. I found
Daniel's board group meets right around the altar and just sets it all up, which I find a little strange.
It is. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. We actually use the altar rail as
right.
It's hard to balance the boards on the altar rail. It kind of keeps falling off. And the lighting is awful. Sometimes the candles catch things on fire.
Right. Yes. But you can get a big Bible and put it underneath the candles to get more of an area glow. Someone's done it somewhere.
Yeah. No, as a general rule, I'm not a big fan of like fluorescent lighting. But I kind of like the more warm, soft lighting. But I think for board games, it really helps to have a very bright overhead light. So some sort of room where you can have, it's really, really well lit.
Lighting is tricky. And in my home, I've realized too, that you get a lot of reflection, unfortunately, on cards and things. So it's both it's being able to see, but also the reflection. So it's, and churches probably have higher ceilings typically.
Yeah.
Fellowship halls and things. So you don't get the reflection problem, which kind of drives me a little bananas.
And I think a lot of places of worship typically have, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. Sorry. Glare. I was thinking better word.
Glare. Yep. No, that's a good point. And in terms of the tables, I think a lot of houses of worship probably have, kind of the two classic choices for industrial tables, or the long rectangular 6 to 8 foot tables or the round tables. And I know when I first got started, I thought, the round tables would be perfect because then everyone is, we're kind of equal footing. We're all around. But I have found that actually those round tables don't work out super well because it's really hard for some people to reach the middle of the table, and if the board is in the middle of the table, everyone is stretching their hands to try. And so those thin rectangular tables, those long, thin rectangular tables, at least in my experience, actually works out better. So if you could have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of those, not 2, but 3 or 4 of those, that way you can provide 2 to 3 games, and then a table where you can just put all the other games that people can browse. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think figuring out what works, and I can certainly see the round table. There's probably a reason board game tables are not round typically for that reason. Yeah, for that you need more access, and and the boards tend to be square, so everything's kind of angled.
Right.
What is that?
Right.
What's a 90-degree angle?
Angular? Oh,
Angular.
right angle?
Angles. Yes.
Right angles. Yeah.
Right angles.
Right angles? That sounds right.
Rectangular. Reticular.
Yeah.
Self-replicating.
Self-replicate. 300 Kelvin.
Rectagonal.
Yeah.
Orthogonal.
Orthogonal's like
diagonal.
Yeah. I don't know what diagonal, orthogonal versus diagonal is like. This just, anyway.
Circumambulate.
I think we had, yeah. I understand. It's something like that. It's something like
Vertigo.
that. We've already talked a little bit about ages and age range of the group. And I think as we've talked about, adults, seniors, children, youth. I love how you did, especially the youth group. But basically, it can be for all ages, but it just requires a sensitivity of having games available for all ages too.
Mm-hmm. And one of the neat things with that is older folks know older games because games, like anything, goes through trends.
Yeah.
I didn't realize even landscaping has trends and
Really?
Everything goes through trends. Yeah, certain trees are from a certain era and they get dated. That's what my mother-in-law has told me. Like, oh yeah, that was popular 20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, It's very odd.
Like what's
certain things?
Do you know an example of a previously popular kind of tree?
I'd
or
have
landscape
to ask her because I can't
Yeah.
ever remember. But there's one that I've seen around here. It's like a big grass thing, like a big grassy something, and you'll just see it out of random yards. And she said, "Oh, that was real popular back then," and so there's still some left over. So if you ever see something that you see a pattern of something that's kind of in the corner of someone's yard that's just sort of neglected and gone crazy, it's probably that. And the others got dug up. Other homes either dug them out or maybe they didn't do well and they got pests and they died, the plants. So you only see occasional, but it's one's thriving. And we had some trees put in and the guy's like, oh yeah, everybody's doing green giant right now.
Wow.
Which is this big evergreen tree. And because it's also resistant to pests and bugs.
Okay.
And those sorts of things until something evolves that wants to kill it. But for now, anyway, all that's to say, board games go through trends. And so there's some older games like Pinochle and stuff that I only know about as a name, but older folks may, play it and they could teach it. And it would be, It's almost like a historical thing. And some of these games are great. They just kind of faded for various reasons.
Yep.
People got tired of it, and then there's a resurgence of interest.
Yeah.
So
We had some members of our group who were of an older generation were very much into mahjong. Not the one you play on the computer, but an actual mahjong set. And they would bring mahjong and they would teach it to the younger folks in the group. And yeah, it was it was fun.
Yeah, there's one for dominoes called Mexican Train.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's called Mexican Train, but yeah, and it was that was a popular one at one time.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you'll see those sets still. I think you can just play with the regular dominoes and some random pieces, but there's some optimized pieces. But yeah, you get that intergenerational. So you want games like that are going to be welcoming and interesting and maybe light or encourage social interaction type things. And so Rummikub's a great one for that as well.
It is, yeah. Which, by the way, do you know is an Israeli game?
I did not know that.
Yeah. It's
it won a bunch of awards back in the day.
Yeah.
So, is it an old Israeli game, or are you saying it was born in Israel, or is it?
I think at least its modern form is a newer game. I think the company that makes it is based out of Israel, or the designer of it is Israeli. I forgot the exact details, but there's some connection to Israel. Maybe some of our listeners will know. Let us know if we'd be interested to hear. Well, the next point really is a crucial point, I think, about a very important role to have in setting up a board game group in your place of worship, and that is you got to have a rules authority. You got to have somebody who just really likes to teach board games, right? And this person does not have to be you. It could be you, but it doesn't have to be you. I suspect if you look around or ask around, you can probably find somebody nearby in the community who would like this role. But it's, Kevin, you and I have talked before. Some people just don't like reading rules, and that's not their thing, getting into rules. But there are some people who really like it, who really like learning board game rules and teaching them. And if you can find someone like that's really important to have, because otherwise, you kind of get to the group and everybody's kind of looking at each other like, well, who's going to, how are we going to learn this game? Who's going to teach this game? However, it's also important that rules authority realizes going into it that they're probably going to have to sacrifice some of their own desires and enjoyment of the group, at least partially, right? Because they're going to have to spend a fair amount of time teaching to other people. Mm-hmm. And as long as they know that going into it, that's okay, right? If
maybe you don't even play the game. Maybe you just teach and kind of do the behind the scenes or whatever, the setup, tear down.
Yep. Yeah.
Shuffling.
Yeah.
I guess for us, that's not been as much of an issue because people typically brought their own games, and so someone always knew how to play because they'd bring games that they knew. Good.
Yeah, that's
probably depends on the group that develops, but people tended to. You don't have a library of games at the church, do you?
Not at my current church, but we did at the previous church.
Oh wow!
Yeah, we actually applied for a grant and got a grant. And with that grant, we purchased a lockable storage cabinet on wheels, so that we could move it in and out when it wasn't in use, and we could lock it up when we were done. And we purchased like maybe 10 kind of core, widely popular games and then so people would still bring their own games, but then there were these kind of core evergreen games in the cabinet that people could go back to. And over time, people contributed games to that cabinet, and that worked out well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you like learning rules?
I do like learning rules. Yeah, I do. How about you?
I do. I don't do well with learning with the rule book. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty good. To me, the rule book is a query. It's almost like a database, and I'm pretty good at navigating and looking up rules if the rule book is done well. But getting an idea of the picture and the pieces, I would much rather go on YouTube, because then as they're discussing a rule, they're holding the piece or setting it down. And so I can see it's hard for me to read a rule book and get the lay of the land without just a lot of reading through and setting up. And I guess I can't see I can't see the lay of the land or the forest for the trees. I just see trees.
I see. I
need to get more of that helicopter. God, I'm into metaphors today. I need to get that overall vision. But some people love rule books and read it and can read it and really get where it's going from the start. But I don't see how it fits together very well. Yeah. So I love YouTube and watch it played or something like that.
Yeah, such great resources on the internet. Yeah, we should say that to our listeners. If you're wanting to start a board game group and you're unfamiliar with board games and you're not an instructions person, you can find basically every game explained on YouTube if you search
pretty
for
much.
Great resources out there. I should say I kind of like a hybrid approach now that you talk about how you like to learn games. I do like rule books, but what I like to do to really learn a game is I set out all the pieces, right, in the board game and everything like that, and I sit on the table with the rule book, and then as every kind of different rule is explained in the rule book, I'll go through those motions on the board with as a way to kind of reinforce what I'm reading, and that so I kind of yeah you're right. So it's not just in my head. Yeah, you're kind of like physically moving, which I maybe kind of relates to what you're saying about watching somebody kind of physically do these things as well versus just reading it. Yeah.
YouTube's a great resource.
Yeah.
But yes, having a rule authority, and sometimes that person isn't a great teacher. I have to say, some people are good at rules, but they're not good teachers because the goal, in my experience, of teaching is giving them just the information they need at that moment. It's very much a on-demand type service. So if you start trying to give them all the rules, you're just going to overwhelm people. If it's a complicated game, now some games are pretty straightforward. You can just walk through the rules. But I think it's much easier to try to get them playing and demonstrate the rules as they go into it. Although that means the first time you play it, you kind of have to say, or whoever wins didn't really win because you're not going to know all the rules anyway.
Right.
So you kind of have to say this is a practice game around.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think, using that language, especially for a person's first game, like, this is just a learning game. It doesn't matter. Try some things, It doesn't really matter never matters who wins or loses, but especially we're just trying to learn, we're going to make mistakes. That's a really good point, Kevin. Yeah. Versus the sense of like just giving enough information to be able to begin to play the game, but not like downloading all of the rule book into people around the table.
It's a rare person that can absorb all that. I guess if they're a very experienced gamer, but and it may be comparing it to other games can help sometimes if they're familiar with it. Like, this game is like Monopoly, except you are doing this, or this game is like Spades. If people know trick-taking games, that will help some folks. But a good teacher is tricky, and right.
Yeah,
and a rules authority, and also some house rules. Like, we're going to only spend a minute looking in the rule book. If we can't find it, we'll just we'll have a house rule and move on.
Right. I think it comes down to the attitude that what's really most important for this group is to build relationships, to help people have a good time, to feel loved and valued, and that they belong. Versus, is the point of the game, to strictly enforce every rule and to get this massive game played, or, the point
That's
isn't the
real
game.
Problem
the point is the
is
people.
Trying to play it exactly right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which brings up kind of another point on that we talk about in the document, which is kind of, just trying to remove the barriers for every barrier that you can to people to play your game. If this really is a ministry, and the root of the word ministry is minister, this idea of serving. If the idea really is to try to serve the people who are there, how can we remove as many barriers as we can to people to participate in the group and to have fun? That can mean making sure the space is physically accessible. Somebody might maybe have limited mobility, so to make sure the room is, wheelchair accessible. It means picking games that are widely accessible. Something that a lot of folks have issues with board games is issues related to color. For people who are colorblind, who see, maybe it's difficult to distinguish reds or blues and greens or things like that. And a lot of board games are getting more and more sensitive to that. And so that's great. So if you can find, board games that are especially sensitive to designing their components in ways that are friendly to maybe people who see who see color differently than maybe most folks, that's really helpful.
Do you do snacks?
That's a tricky
one.
Topic. We don't. And I'll be honest, that's a growing edge for me, a growing area for me. Sometimes, every now and then, we'll do something with snacks, and just between you and me, Kevin, and the listeners, whenever there are snacks there, I'm having a constant inner dialogue about like, okay, it's okay, Daniel. This is about people. This isn't about the games. Right. But I'm just cringing the whole time. It's like, keep those snacks away from the games, because most of the time it's my games and I don't want anything to happen to them. Yeah. How about you?
I've had a similar sort of hesitancy, but at least when it was done at our church, it was, people are going to bring snacks no matter what. Like, they just expected there to be food. Mm-hmm. And so you just had to roll with it. So it's tricky, especially because part of it, it's not just spillage, but also just getting greasy fingers and things.
Right.
And if they're eating Doritos or potato chips and, but it just was clear that we had to have something. So,
and there are some snacks that are better.
Which was also a headache too, of having to go to the grocery store and buy stuff. But
yeah. Pretzels, carrot sticks, water. Those are. Mm-hmm. There are some snacks that are better, versus like Cheetos or like you said, Doritos. Those are things that are really greasy and crumbly, and those are especially maybe threatening to boy. Yes. Another thought I've had with limited success, but it's just kind of saying, sometimes I'll just name it, which isn't maybe great, but we'll have like a snack section of the room. It'll be kind of over there, and and I'll say, and maybe I'm going too far with this, but I'll say, I'll just say it, I'll say, hey, it's awesome that we have these snacks. And I'll kind of poke fun at myself, and say, and I'm so sorry, I just, these games, I just want to preserve them, for future people to be able to play, for months or years to come. And so the snacks can kind of be hard on the games, and I know I'm so silly with all this, but if we could, if enjoy the snacks, but if you could kind of enjoy them on this side of the room, then if you're going to come back, maybe just try to have some water or maybe only carrot sticks or pretzels around the games or something like that. I don't know whether that works or not, but
how do people receive it?
I think for the most part, people are generally understanding of it. Yeah.
I mean, if it's your game, I think it's fair. And I think most people get that, especially if they have any sense of what these games can cost. Now, if it's the church or house of worship's copy, it might be a little more open-ended, and that might help you, right? Because it's not your own copy. So you still want to take care of it, but it's not really your private selection.
Right. And you're right. I think it's a good idea to, it's fine to have some guidelines, but at the end of it, I do think it kind of comes down to also having to tell yourself that what is the point, getting back to that why, what is the why? Right. Is it ultimately to have pristine games, or is it to build relationships and build community? Yeah.
And with the kids, I've had to or Jenny, I've had to loosen up on some of that. So I will say, just y'all be careful, but, some people just are gonna, they're gonna need to snack. Yeah.
So, which brings us to, I guess, a point we've talked about earlier, but just to revisit again, which is what type of games do we have? What type of games do you want to have? And having a diverse game library that can that can be safe for children to play, where you don't mind about the components, but also more interesting to adults is great. Mm-hmm. We name some potential games on this document if you want to, and places where you can buy them. We're not getting any kickback or anything from any place. We're just suggesting it. But I'll just list off a few. I'm interested in yours too, Kevin. But we talk about Six Nimmt, which is sometimes called Take 5 here in the U.S. It's a German game. Anomia, Codenames, Just One, The Mind, No Thanks, Similo, Strike, Telestrations, Wits and Wagers. All of these are fairly simple rule games that play fairly quickly. So they're, you're not going to find, none of these are like super heavy games, super heavy Euro games are going to take a long time to play. Mm-hmm. Having some of I always bring some of those. I always bring some heavy games. And there are always some that are interested in that. But in terms of games that have the most appeal to the most people, it's usually these simple rule, quick playing games like that. And they're great. Part of it has just kind of been, as a hobby board gamer, me just kind of going into that time with some different expectations. I don't expect to go and play, Caverna or Terraforming Mars.
I think that's a major thing, is we all are secretly really wanting a board game group that will play exactly what we want. We basically want clones of ourselves that are slightly different and interesting, and that are available to play the games we want. And even if you have a board game group or something, this is not it. Like this is, I think you're right. You have to change your expectations, that you can't force a bunch of people to start playing Dune Imperium or something. Like,
Right.
It's just not fair to them or yourself, and you're going to get frustrated. So
Yeah.
you have to let the group set the pace, and bringing them and seeing if someone's interested and showing it to them is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, being a little cognizant of what's realistic, and also just being clear about the goals, that this is about the community and the group and not about the fact that you really want to play this with 3 people.
Right, exactly.
And you can strong arm someone into doing it.
One way we've tried to address that desire for heavier games, and we've only done this once because then COVID hit, but was this idea of like once or twice a year having a big Saturday game day at the church. Like we still have our weekly game group, but then Saturday game day we have like from 9 till 3, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on a Saturday or something like that. And then you can really pull out these big heavy games, and play, and people might be interested. And I don't know. Kevin, how about you? You mentioned Bananagrams, Rummikub. Those are such great games. Any other thoughts?
Been popular.
Games you recommend?
What's the one with the monsters?
Horrified?
Tokyo. No, Tokyo.
Oh, King of Tokyo.
King of Tokyo, which I really don't like. I think that is a really overrated game personally. Yeah. But that's a good one for the kids, and it's simple, and it's kind of fun because you get to sort of, but it's not a game I personally enjoy. But that's a good, if you've got small kids that are showing up, first, second, third grade, that might be a game that they would enjoy.
Yeah.
Because it's always fun to like pound on someone secretly.
Yeah. One of our regular listeners, Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
If you're listening, comes to our group along with his whole family. He and his wife and their children come, and King of Tokyo is a game that I think that they have found is good for that group because, like you said, because that setting with children and their parents playing together.
And it's kind of goofy and funny, like the robot thing. So it's actually a lot like our skit, just more violent.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, and lots of people like it, and maybe I've just not been in the right setting. But it is neat to sort of see that everybody's to take a turn and getting whopped on. So it feels fair.
Yeah.
And it's kind of thrilling too as a kid, I guess, to get points or cubes or something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that one, Rummikub, Settlers of Catan would probably be a good one as well. That's a good bridge game in terms of a bridge from like a Monopoly type thing to seeing something more interesting. So those are all good games. That's probably about it.
I like those.
I think we tried Pandemic once, but that was a bit of a stretch for the group that was there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But that would be. Yeah. I think we did Pandemic once as well. Yeah, and you're right. It was okay for the ones who played it, but it wasn't like a whole group kind of thing. And actually, speaking of Brian, I think he and his son were in that group who others played it.
Nice.
But
I love Pandemic.
Yeah.
So just knowing your group and trying different stuff and encouraging people to sample things and it's a great experience, great opportunity.
Yeah.
You comment about including explicitly spiritual elements. So how would you do that? Yeah,
I just say not to be afraid of doing that. For us, what that's meant is we close with a prayer every night, and that's been the main thing. And I would just encourage just not to be afraid to include spiritual religious elements at the end of every night. This may take 5-10 minutes. We get in a circle, depending on context. Maybe we'll hold hands, maybe we won't. And we just ask, what's on your heart tonight? What do you want prayers for? And again, depending on context, sometimes I'll pray for it, what we've said. Sometimes we'll just pray for each other around the circle. Sometimes we have the kind of call and response thing where somebody will say a concern and then say, Lord, in your mercy. And then we all say, hear our prayer. Mm-hmm. But just praying for each other has been, I think, has been a meaningful part of the routine, the tradition of the group. We've thought about supporting a mission project. We haven't done that yet, but that's something we've talked about, supporting a mission project.
What would that mean? You mean
raising
like
money
maybe or doing something?
I guess a couple different things. Like we could, on a simple level, we could just take up a collection every week and say, this is going to go to this mission project. But what it could also mean is, that maybe we all meet at the local food pantry on a Saturday and we all work there.
Right.
Or something we have talked about that did not materialize, but was that, we could take up a collection of family-friendly board games and then help distribute them at Christmas time or something like that,
Right.
But just things like that. I on the one hand, getting back to where we started with get your why right. On the one hand, I don't feel like everything has to be explicitly religious to happen at a place of worship. Rightly or wrongly, I'm kind of the mindset that almost everything can be related to religion, one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I remember, Kevin, a conversation that you and I had back in college about that years ago. Just how that can be one of the gifts of religion, is that it can encompass everything, and so I'm still of that mindset, that everything can be religious, whether we don't have to feel this need to make everything explicitly religious. Mm-hmm. However, I also, on the other hand, I don't think we have to be afraid of incorporating spiritual religious elements either. Mm-hmm. It is happening at a place of worship, and that's cool. I think it's if there are people outside the church who come to that group, I think it's okay to show them that it's okay to be religious or spiritual too, mm-hmm. And so any thoughts on that for you?
Yeah, I've not, the group that we had did not get into that territory. So that's really interesting to sort of see it growing as a group that has this group dynamic. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. I could also see, though, asking people afterwards kind of like, well, what did you learn about yourself from these games? Or what did you learn about someone else?
Yeah, that would be cool.
What does this tell you about God by this process? So almost use it as a self-reflective moment.
That
would be a neat sharing moment. Yeah. Like, tell me one thing you learned about someone else today. Like, I didn't know that Harry used to have a pet iguana. So
that's right.
I think that gets back to the community idea.
Yeah. I love that. That. That's a great idea. I love those reflection questions. Let me try that. And I'll give credit to Kevin.
Yes.
On the that's
time
good.
To get Kevinated.
Kevinated. This is a 7 on the Kevin scale, not the Kelvin scale, which is different.
That's right.
And then the last thing is just communication that we talk about. Just as is and everything that happens in a place of worship. Just communicate. People won't come if they don't know that it's happening. And
everyone's invited.
Yeah,
and there may be a core group, and there are other groups, and
that's right,
subgroups.
You can't really over communicate. Just repeat in as many ways as you can possibly think of, and that just yeah. And then I guess one final overall idea is, it's not really on the sheet per se, but we've touched upon it throughout the group. Is just the posture of a ministry is serving, right? Is service, and ultimately seeing this group as a way that it can be a blessing to other people, And so I think if we approach it that way, then I think it can help answer so many of the questions about, what kind of games we offer and how we teach rules and how we handle snacks and how we handle different age groups and all these things, if we approach it with the overall goal is to help people feel welcomed and loved and that they belong, that it kind of helps to answer a lot of other questions,
Right.
Ultimately that trumps all the other stuff,
Right. Yeah. I mean, lots of people are lonely. Anything to help people negate the loneliness of their lives. In certain settings and certain realities or situations, that is a positive thing in this world.
Yeah.
So, All right, Daniel. Well, if people want to get a actual copy of this PDF that we, really you, have created, they can do that by subscribing to our newsletter, which is available at Linktree.
Yep.
Linked.re. Is that right?
Linktr.ee.
Yes.
Linktr.ee/BoardGameFaith. Or if you just go to the bio in our Instagram or Facebook page, you'll find the link tree there. And there'll be a spot there where you can sign up for our newsletter. And again, you can just email us as well. But we'd love to share that document with you. And thank you so much for listening and for your interest. And if you have any, we'd love to hear about your experiences. Tell us about you. If you have a group in your place of worship, or you have any that you'd love to share, any experiences or insights from that, please do that. Email us, go to our Discord server. There's a place on that for it as well.
Yeah. Interact with us. Let us know your thoughts and how this has worked for you, or ideas or questions. Just let us know how we can help, or how you can help us by helping you, by helping us, by telling us your story.
Absolutely. We all have a lot. I know I have a lot to learn, especially about the Kevin scale and the Kelvin scale. Also, next episode. I'm really interested in this. We're talking about sometimes it's called the Alfonso manuscript. Sometimes it's called the Alfonso Book of Games, but it's this ancient medieval document about games and God and the meaning of life. And I'm looking forward to it.
We're going to go deep into history, folks.
Yeah. And I think if people will go to our Discord server, we'll set up a channel there where you can actually read the document online if you're interested. But you don't have to, of course, in advance of next episode.
Awesome. All right. Well, enjoyed as always, Daniel. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Kevin.